Eli said, I graduated from Valley High School in 1965. I spent 31 years in the Air Force, most of it as an intelligence officer, and I served in 5 armed conflicts from Vietnam through the initial air operations in Afghanistan. I think I knew I was going to be an officer from an early age. I had a personality trait that is common to most officers. As my mother generously pointed out, I was a stuffed shirt. And you know, the Bible says if your own mother calls you a stuffed shirt, you're a stuffed shirt. That may be in the Book of Mormon. I've lived in Utah so long I can't get it straight. Stuffed shirt or not, it's an honor and a privilege to be here today to honor my fellow classmates for their sacrifices in service of their country. I knew almost all the Vietnam era guys whose names and photos are here. If I may, I'd like to say a few words about 2 of them that I knew well. Lon M. Fletcher, Mike Fletcher. We went to Griegos together, then Garfield, then Valley. And I remember in grade school, when the teacher called him to the front of the class to recite his tables of 13. Now, I don't know whether you recall learning your times tables or not, but the matrix had 1 through 12 across the top, 1 through 12 across the side, and the lower right-hand corner had 144. And I was under the impression, because it wasn't that easy for me to memorize that matrix, that the educational establishment had decided that it was worth my time because I was unlikely in my adult life to ever encounter a number higher than 144. By the time Mike sat down, I realized that there were numbers higher than 144, that life was going to be a lot more complicated for me, and that guys like Mike Fletcher, who knew and even loved numbers, were going to inherit the earth, and I was not. Mike should have been a mathematician, statistician, an architect, an engineer. Instead, he lost his life in Vietnam before his 19th birthday. Kenneth R. Clough. I didn't know Kenny Clough until high school. We were in German class together. And one day the teacher was summoned to the office from some administrative chore. And Kenny got up from the back of the room, went forward to her big oak desk, pulled the center drawer open, and promptly stamped himself about 12 hall passes. Jane A. Hughes, Jane A. Hughes, Jane A. Hughes. He stuffed the hall passes in his pocket, put everything back in order, and returned to his desk. I was absolutely astounded at his audacity. But Kenny Clough was a man on a mission. He had things to do, he had places to go, and he wasn't going to let something as insignificant as a hall pass stand in his way. I was on a mission too. I thought my mission was to sit quietly in German class and memorize verbs and then get up when the bell rang. Did I mention that I was a stuffed shirt? Last time I saw Kenny was at UNM. He was in Navy ROTC uniform, and I was in the Air Force program. Kenny told me at that time that he was afraid Vietnam wouldn't last long enough for him to make his impression. Kenny suffered from an ailment that many of us suffered from when our fathers had served in World War II with honor and distinction. And Kenny especially felt that because his dad, little Doc Clough, who was a professor at TU, had been a submariner in World War II. And that was the most dangerous thing a young guy could do in that conflict. More dangerous than being an island hopping Marine, more dangerous than being a rifleman or an infantry company, and more dangerous than flying bombers over Nazi-occupied Europe. But old Doc Clough came home alive and well. Long after I saw Kenny, I heard he had dropped out of school, joined the Army, and was in helicopter school. He was shortly posted to Vietnam. Kenny's dad came home in 1945, alive and well, but Kenny was killed in Vietnam flying dust-off missions in Quang Tri Province. They talk about beautiful women being able to walk in a room and through the door and light the place up. Kenny had that kind of personality. He had that kind of radiance and that kind of charisma. If he had returned alive, he could have lit up his community, his city, and his state, but he did not. I want to mention one other veteran who did come home, because I think it's an example of what the guys on this memorial could have done if they had survived. How many of you knew Ed Sandoval, represented the Northwest Valley in Albuquerque for about 20 years in the legislature? He was chairman of the House Budget Committee. Very powerful position. Eddie was my backdoor neighbor. We went to Griegos together, and for some reason we took the bus to school but walked home along the ditch banks, where we were regularly ambushed by pachucos. And Eddie was already practicing to be a diplomat, and he'd say, "The gringos were me." And sometimes that worked, and sometimes the bill got beat up. Eddie and I went to UNM together. We were both blue-collar working kids, first in our families to go to college. And we were both working nearly full-time and going to school full-time. In the second semester of our sophomore year, both of us had to drop a class because we just got overwhelmed. Well, the draft board would allow you a deferment if you were a full-time student, but not if you were a part-time student. So we were summoned to the old courthouse in downtown Albuquerque to take our pre-induction physicals. Eddie passed and went straight to Vietnam. I failed. They said I had an excessively rapid heartbeat. Well, your heart would have been pounding too if you were about to get drafted in the U.S. Army in May of 1967. Eddie came home, finished college, established a successful business, had a wonderful wife and a great family, and he would look you in the eye and tell you he was a politician. He was happy and proud to be a politician, but because he knew politicians could do good things for their community. And Eddie did. He took care not of big corporations and not of big campaign donors and not of the 1%, but of the ordinary citizens in the Northwest Valley that he represented. Right after I retired from the Air Force, my Air Force traveling buddy said he wanted to see New Mexico, and we were down here mooching off my big sister. And I picked up the phone and called Eddie and asked if we could do lunch. And he said, "Come on up to the Capitol and work it out." So my friend and I went up. Very intimidating experience. He had a suite of offices, a very officious secretary and 4 budget analysts guarding his door. But we had an appointment, so we got right in. Spent about 45 minutes chit-chatting about old times, especially at Valley High School. And Eddie said, "Come on, let me show you around." So as we walked into the outer office, we were assaulted by lobbyists. It reminded me of the Pachucos. So these were white boys in $4,000 suits. They were waving their arms around. Mr. Chairman, a moment of your time." And Eddie put his hand up like this and he said, "I'm going to show a couple of Air Force officers around the Capitol. No time for draft dodgers today." So Ed Sandoval had that love for other veterans that most of us feel and know about. And I think he also had a barely concealed contempt for the men of our generation who did not serve. I'd like to close with a poem. It's only 3 of 7 stanzas. The title is "The Fallen," and it was written by an Englishman named Lawrence Binyon. This first appeared in the Times of London in December of 1914. World War I was only in its 4th or 5th month when this poem was written and published. And the shock to the British and to all the warring nations was extreme. No one had expected the industrial scale slaughter and bloodletting that those countries had experienced in the first few months of the Great War. And the war had 4 more years to run, and its second phase would start in 1939 and run another several years. So this is what I wanted to read to you. "They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady in the glow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They mingled not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labor of the daytime. They sleep beyond their homeland's shore. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not worry them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them." Thank you.